Preocupado el presidente anaranjado, viendo que las elecciones las perdió.
Solicita a los que le hacen los mandados que se apuren, pues la fiesta terminó.
Y mirando que se va a acabar el varo,
han formado un titingo. Se han negado a abandonar la Casa Blanca, a la silla del despacho se amarró. Los pelitos que le quedan los arranca, pataleando por la rabia que le dio. Y mirando a Cuba con sus batas blancas, de cabeza se tiró.
El que tenga confusión que se confunda, el que quiera claridad que venga a ver.
La jugada no es compleja ni profunda, está claro cómo quieren proceder.
Solo falta que nosotros los dejemos,
y eso no va a suceder.
Con la conga de los hoyos no te metas.
No te metas, no te metas.
Cuba viva sin que nadie la someta.
No te metas, no te metas.
Mi tierra linda, mi cubanía, mi bandera se respeta.
No te metas.
De La Habana para Santiago, defiende lo tuyo, cubano.
que no te metas con mi tierra, que mi Cuba se respeta.
Soy el mambí que aún vive con el machete en la mano. No, 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 no. ¿Qué me importa si comentas?
De donde vengo yo, estamos listos para la contienda. Aguanta ahí, pero dime tú, ¿pa' qué tú inventas? Con mi pueblo guarachando, yo vine aquí para cantar. Toda Cuba está esperando que yo la ponga a gozar.
Aquí nadie tiene miedo, tú conmigo no te metas. Oh, no. ¡Hey! Oye, soquetón, mi alegría te molesta.
Porque tú me conoces bien en todas mis facetas. Que no tenemos miedo, sal de ahí, no abra esa gaveta.
Mic? Yes, you are. Okay. My mic was not plugged into the USB port that it uses, so you probably couldn't hear me. I hope you can hear me now. Good morning or good afternoon where you are. Good evening if you're watching us in time, perhaps from the continent. This is Weekly Pan-African News presented to you by the All-African People's Revolutionary Party New Mexico chapter. My name is Onya Sanu. I am a cadre with the APIP New Mexico chapter, and I'll be one of your hosts today. My comrade Monica is also here, and she'll be doing some world geopolitical updates a little bit later on. But this is our weekly program, Weekly Pan-African News. We present it to you every single Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. We give you political education. We give you news and analysis. We give you updates on revolutionary Pan-African organizing, and we do that all from a revolutionary Pan-African socialist perspective because we are members of a revolutionary Pan-African socialist party. That party is the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. It was founded 52 years ago. I think it's 53 now. 53 years ago by Kwame Nkrumah, the first democratically elected president of the first African nation to gain independence from European colonialism. That nation was, of course, Ghana. And when Ghana gained its independence, Kwame Nkrumah said Ghana's independence is meaningless without the total liberation and unification of Africa and its entire diaspora. And so he called for the formation of a revolutionary Pan-African political party that would unite all of the liberation struggles on the continent and the diaspora around the objective of Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa. And the AAPRP, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, is that party. We are still around. We are fighting throughout the African world, all over the continent, throughout the United States, in Europe, in Canada, and now in the Caribbean. We are fighting and building as the APRP. So also, I'm just gonna be transparent. My belly is upset. I feel sick, and it's very unfortunate. And I feel like I was just telling Monica, I feel like I'm constantly sick right before the show, but it always works out. So we're gonna have the ancestors guide us and keep me focused, so I don't keep thinking about my belly. I'm trying to talk to y'all, but we started this show, Weekly Pan-African News, a little bit over a year ago at the very beginning of the pandemic here in the United Snakes. We wanted to continue to build with our people. We wanted to continue to raise consciousness. We wanted to continue to put revolutionary Pan-African perspective out in the world, but we did not want to gather people in person if it was not safe to do so. And so Weekly Pan-African News is one of many vehicles the New Mexico chapter came up with in order to continue to reach the masses of our people. And also, since Weekly Pan-African News started, there's now like a whole family of AAPRP produced online media. Like our comrade Ajamu out of California has his weekly program on Sunday afternoons with his daughter Shakora, which we always advertise. Comrade Mzeri, who used to be the All African Women's Union coordinator for All African Women's Revolutionary Union coordinator for the entire planet, but who is now just a cadre in California, has her own show, Revolutionary African Women. The Kaji Online Circle has the Pantsula podcast. So now there's all of this All African People's Revolutionary Party media that you can watch like basically all week, like Monday, Thursday, Sunday, Saturday. You can watch APRP people talking, so it's kind of awesome. But anywho, this is our show, Weekly Pan-African News, and we always start off the show with three things every single time we do. First and foremost, we talk about who we are and what we're doing, which I just did. We're the All African People's Revolutionary Party New Mexico chapter. And the next thing that we always do is that we want to call in an ancestor, a revolutionary ancestor. And the reason why we do that is because we understand as revolutionary African people, as Pan-African revolutionary socialists, that we are part of a struggle that began the very first moment the very first European colonizers set foot on the shores of the African continent. We are not reinventing the wheel. We are not starting a new movement. We are continuing a legacy of struggle that is centuries old, which means that our ancestors, our revolutionary ancestors, laid the groundwork for us to be here, to be talking to y'all today, and to be doing this work in 2021. And so we must honor them, we must uplift them, and we must, most importantly, tell the truth about them. Because if you are a revolutionary African person, a revolutionary colonized person, or a revolutionary socialist, guarantee you that capitalism will find a way to lie on you. It's happened to me. It's happened to my comrades in the APRP. It's happened to Hood Communists, the project I'm a part of. It certainly happened to the APRP as a whole. They be lying on us. And so we have a responsibility to use our platforms to tell the truth. So the ancestor we want to call in today is a man who is very controversial within the United Snakes because people have been taught a lot of lies about him. But we African revolutionaries unapologetically celebrate and love him. And that ancestor is Fidel Castro. That's right. That's who I said. Fidel Castro. We unapologetically stand the Cuban Revolution, and we uplift Fidel Castro as a great revolutionary, as a good and honest man who the masses of people in Cuba loved and supported and chose as their leader for many, many, many years. For folks that don't know, this week is actually the anniversary of the failed Bay of Pigs invasion on Cuba. The CIA under President John F. Kennedy attempted to organize Cuban gusanos, exiles that fled the Cuban Revolution, into a terrorist invasion of Cuba in an attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution. They launched this invasion at the Bay of Pigs, and that shit was smacked down. It was smacked down, y'all. They sent 1,400 traitors and mercenaries, and the masses of people in Cuba were armed and organized to repel that invasion. One very important thing to understand about the Bay of Pigs is that it was not the Cuban military that repelled that invasion. It was the masses of organized Cuban people who were armed, who repelled that invasion, who defended their revolution. And so this week, it started on, the Bay of Pigs invasion started on April 17th. It lasted until April 19th, 1961. And so this week is the anniversary of that failed US CIA operation attempting to overthrow the Cuban Revolution. When the masses of Cuban people put that shit down, oh my God, I get so hyped thinking about it, because they defended their revolution, y'all. They defended it and they won. When the masses of Cuban people put down the Bay of Pigs invasion, Fidel Castro on April 16th, 1961, declared the Cuban Revolution to be a socialist revolution. The Cuban people took to the streets to protest against the bombing of airports and air bases by the U.S. military that was done to facilitate the Bay of Pigs invasion in Playa Girón. Bay of Pigs is Playa Girón is Spanish for Bay of Pigs, by the CIA to overthrow the revolutionary leader Fidel Castro. 4 days later, just 4 days later, the invaders surrendered and the Cuban Revolution grew even stronger. And this is what Fidel Castro said about that. He said, that's why they can't forgive, and that we are there in their noses, and that we have made a socialist revolution right under the noses of the United States. We don't defend that revolution with mercenaries. We defend that revolution with men and women of the people. Fidel Castro, great revolutionary leader, words upon the successful repelling of the Bay of Pigs invasion by the masses of Cuban people in 1961. So we definitely wanted to uplift that history this week. And also for the political education topic on the show this week, we're going to be talking about the importance of solidarity with Cuba and one organization doing this work. So it's going to be a lot of Cuba shit in this episode. If you're a person who has been taught to hate Cuba, you've internalized a lot of lies about Cuba, you're going to feel hot and bothered by the discussion we're going to have today. But you can learn some truth if you can stick around. Anywho, so that's the ancestor we're calling in today. That is Fidel Castro. We honor, love, and celebrate Comrade Fidel Castro. And then the third thing we always do during our intro is we want to acknowledge that we are speaking to y'all from stolen land. We are speaking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory, also known as Albuquerque, New Mexico. Albuquerque, New Mexico, or Albuquerque specifically, was the name of a straight up Spanish duke, like colonizer. He stole this land and like slapped his name on it. Now that's what it's called. But this is Tiwa territory. Hundreds of years, thousands of years before the Spanish got here, the Tiwa Nation was here living peacefully. So the Tiwa Nation is still here. This is still their land. They will get their land back. It is not a metaphor. We are being straight up, direct, not speaking metaphorically. So just like we are fighting for our land back in Africa, just like Palestinian family are fighting for their land back in occupied Palestine, just like Irish family are fighting for their land back in Northern Ireland, Western indigenous nations of the Western Hemisphere, from Canada to the tip of South America, are fighting for their land back, and we are in solidarity with them in that struggle. Land back from Africa to Turtle Island. So that was the intro. I see someone put Castro with a bunch of exclamation points. I salute you, comrade, because you recognize that Castro is a hero. But as I mentioned, for today's political education topic, we are going to be talking about a very old solidarity organization with Cuba, and that organization is known as the Venceremos Brigade. The Venceremos Brigade. Venceremos is a Spanish word for we shall overcome. You call it the We Shall Overcome Brigade, but it's actually called the Venceremos Brigade. And for folks who know me, you know that I went to Cuba for the very first time in my life 2 years ago now. I can't believe it's been that long. And I went with the Venceremos Brigade. The Venceremos Brigade is an anti-imperialist project of political education and voluntary labor in solidarity with the Cuban Revolution. It is an intergenerational, multiracial, multicultural, and gender-expansive / inclusive collective of volunteers committed to changing U.S. policy towards Cuba and strengthening the relationship between the Cuban Revolution and movements for justice in the United States. And that description, intergenerational, multiracial, multicultural, gender-expansive, perfectly describes the brigade that I was a part of. I went on the 50th anniversary brigade of the Venceremos Brigade. It was over 100 people. I think it was like close to 200 people, all ages, all nations, all abilities, all genders, all together in this trip, learning about Cuba. They used a framework of transformative justice. They put us through an extremely intensive political education program so we didn't go to Cuba and act like ugly Americans. They taught us from the ground up all about the Cuban Revolution. We had days that like started at 5 a.m. that were just like packed full of learning. It was incredible. And also we provided material aid for the masses of people in Cuba, because of the blockade, which I'm gonna talk about in a second, they can't get like a lot of like basic ass shit in Cuba because of the United States. And so we were able to bring like suitcases full of stuff to give to the Cuban folks that were feeding us and teaching us and housing us. So just a very incredible experience. And it's something that the Venceremos Brigade has been doing for over 50 years. There has been a Venceremos Brigade every year for 50 years. It is the oldest Cuban solidarity delegation in the United States. It was begun by youth living in the US who wanted to show up in solidarity with the Cuban Revolution. At the time when the US government was straight up attacking Cuba, when they were panicking about what a Cuban Revolution just off the coast of the United States meant, there were youth in the United States who were revolutionary socialists, who were members of organizations like SNCC, like the Black Panther Party, like the Young Lords, like the Students for a Democratic Society, who were like, actually, we're not afraid of this. Actually, this looks pretty cool. Actually, how can we show up for this? How can we help this? And that's how the Venceremos Brigade was born. It was born among like youth fighting for justice 50 years ago who wanted to show up for Cuba, who built this project to provide material and political solidarity with the Cuban Revolution from the belly of the beast. And so what were the objectives of the Venceremos Brigade when it was born and today? Well, there are three main goals that the VB has. The first goal is to end the United States blockade of Cuba, end all US imposed travel restrictions, and end all regime change programs. Like I mentioned a second ago, the United States government has an economic blockade against Cuba that drastically affects Cuba's ability to both import and exports the goods it needs to keep its economy going. So like the reason like you see like lots of pictures of Cuba or Havana, and they have like really old fancy cars, like cars from the 50s, and they're still running like modern day, that is not by choice, y'all. Cuba is not choosing to do that. Cuba has all those cool old-timey looking cars because Cuba is not allowed, because of the US blockade, to import newer cars. They have to be extremely economical about fixing those old cars because oftentimes they can't even import new car parts. When the pandemic hit during COVID-19, Cuba attempted to buy ventilators en masse and was blocked from doing so by the US blockade. Also, Cuba is known internationally for having an extremely advanced urban organic farming infrastructure. They don't use pesticides. They don't use like a lot of like the GMO. They don't grow like a lot of the GMO type foods that are grown in the United States under industrial agriculture. And then again, it's not by choice. They're not allowed to import fertilizer and basic things that are used to grow food on a mass basis. So the US blockade on Cuba prevents them from importing all kinds of things. When you hear about like lines for food or gas in Cuba and people put that on socialism, that is a lie. It is a direct consequence of the US blockade. When I was in Cuba 2 years ago, there were rolling blackouts. And the reason why that was happening is because Cuba as an island, Cuba has no oil. When they have to get oil to produce gas or oil for generators, they have to go to Venezuela and buy it. And so there was a ship coming from Venezuela, loaded down with oil, and the US Navy intercepted and seized the ship. And so Cuba was not able to get gas to put in its generators. And so Cuba had no choice but to endure rolling blackouts. One of the Cuban comrades we talked about how she had no lights in her home at night for a straight up week. And there was no end in sight because the United States had seized that ship. So these are just a couple of examples of what the US blockade on Cuba looks like. It has cost the Cuban economy billions of dollars at this point. It has caused mass suffering in Cuba. When you hear about people fleeing Cuba, when you hear about Cuban refugees, the reason why they're leaving is because the US blockade in Cuba makes life extremely hard on the island. People do not have access to basic goods. Basic goods, y'all. Another thing that the blockade on Cuba affects is internet access. Internet access. You are a person who very often watches US news and media. I'm very sure that you have heard nothing but lies about Cuba, just point blank lies about Cuba. And one of the lies that is quite often told about Cuba is that internet access is restricted. The people living in Cuba don't have free access to the same internet we do. What they do not say when they share that criticism is that the reason why Cuba does not have high-speed internet access is because of the US blockade. There are high-speed fiber optic cables literally running underwater right next to the island. right next to the island. They are not able to access high-speed internet using those cables because they are denied, they are cut off access by the U.S. blockade. The United States is the reason why Cuba does not have high-speed internet. They have to use slow-ass satellite internet. It's, by the way, freely accessible by anyone, but you have to pay, and it's really slow. So all of these criticism you might notice that the U.S. media and the U.S. government applies against Cuba can almost all be traced back to the blockade, back to the illegal and genocidal U.S. economic blockade on Cuba that drastically contracts the Cuban economy. So one of the objectives of the Venceremos Brigade is to end the U.S. blockade of Cuba. Another part, like I just mentioned, is they want to end all U.S. imposed travel restrictions. And so right now, in order to travel to Cuba, you have to have your trip fall into an extremely limited number of categories. Like something like building with the Cuban people or engaging in business, of course, because capitalism never sleeps. They want to open up the market of Cuba to capitalism. So you basically have to like fall within like a certain number of categories. And if your travel is not within that category, you're ostensibly not allowed to go. And so part of the work of the VB is to say, nah, like we are U.S. citizens. We should have the right to go wherever the fuck we want to. You're not going to tell us we can't go to a place just because it's socialist. That makes no sense whatsoever. We demand the end of all U.S. imposed travel restrictions on Cuba. And ending those travel restrictions is not just about, you know, people want to engage in tourism and just go to Cuba because it's beautiful. It's also about the fact that these travel restrictions makes it really difficult for people to see their goddamn families on the island. It makes it really difficult for people to engage in scientific research and medical research in partnership with Cuban doctors and scientists. It basically makes it very, very difficult for anyone who's not trying to exploit Cuba to actually go to Cuba. So the VB demands the end of all U.S. imposed travel restrictions, and also it demands the end of all regime change programs against the Cuban Revolution, because the purpose of the U.S. economic blockade on Cuba, the purpose of the travel restrictions, the purpose of all U.S. policy towards Cuba is ultimately regime change. They're trying to overthrow the Cuban Revolution, y'all. The United States has been openly hostile to Cuba ever since the masses of Cuban people rose up, overthrew Batista, and began to build a socialist state. Because after that revolution was waged, after the dictatorship of Batista was overthrown, after Fidel Castro came to power and Cuba began building socialism, the United States government and U.S. corporations were cut off from access to exploiting Cuba's wealth and labor. Before the Cuban Revolution, Cuba was basically a giant sugar plantation for U.S. corporations. It was a place where wealthy American members of the ruling class would go and engage in gambling and prostitution and all kinds of like vices. They basically treated like Cuba as their personal playground as well as a plantation. And then after the Cuban Revolution, Cuba's industries were nationalized. The wealth and resources of Cuba were collectively owned by the masses of Cuban people, and U.S. corporations and the U.S. government could no longer get a cut. So that is the reason why the U.S., or part of the reason why, the U.S. is seeking to overthrow the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban government, because they want free access to loot, y'all. They want that plantation relationship back. That's all it is. That's all it is. So we want the end of all regime change programs against the Cuban government, against the Cuban Revolution, because quite frankly, the U.S. government has no right whatsoever to decide what kind of government any other nation has. They just have no right. The second goal of the Venceremos Brigade is to end the illegal U.S. military occupation of Guantanamo Bay. I'm sure you have heard the name Guantanamo Bay before. Guantanamo Bay is a concentration camp that the U.S. government runs on stolen Cuban land. They straight up stole that land from Cuba, and now they torture people on it. They imprison people on it without trial. There is a massive military base with a golf course and a McDonald's and a concentration camp where people are tortured. The U.S. attempts to pay Cuba for use of that land. The Cuban government has never taken that money, always demanding the return of that land and the end of the illegal U.S. military occupation. They are not interested in collaborating with the U.S. military and torturing people. They just want their damn land back. And so one of the goals of the Venceremos Brigade is to return Guantanamo Bay to the masses of people in Cuba. And the last goal of the Venceremos Brigade is to strengthen movements for justice in the United States through exchange and collaboration with Cuba. And so in order to understand why that objective exists, it's important to understand like how significant the Cuban Revolution was. So Cuba is, it has been for hundreds of years, a majority African nation. Cuba's population is 60 to 70% African descent. When you get off the plane in Havana, it is immediately obvious the majority of people you see are of African descent. So not only is Cuba a socialist country, Cuba is a socialist country that is majority African. Cuba is a socialist country that waged a revolution against U.S. imperialism and won, and the people that did that were mostly fucking Africans. Cuba is an African nation. And I'm not the only one saying that. Amilcar Cabral, the PIGC, revolutionary Pan-Africanist, said the same motherfucking thing. Fidel Castro, when he was sending solidarity delegations to wage anti-colonial struggles in Africa, said, we are an African nation. We are repaying a debt from slavery. We are going back home to contribute to the liberation of our homeland. So Cuba understands itself as an African nation, and the African Revolution understands Cuba as an African nation. Cuba is an African nation that defied U.S. imperialism that exists 100 miles off the coast of the United States, just chilling. No matter what the United States does, no matter how it tries to attack Cuba, no matter the blockade or invasions or lies, all these assassination attempts on Fidel Castro, none of that shit works. And so think about the United States, which is like this bastion of white supremacy, which projects violent white power all around the world, whose whole image is about the supremacy of the European race being defied by this island that is majority African. Like, think about how that would make the United States feel. It's hilarious to me to think about that African people, massive African people, were able to organize and defy the United States and continue defying the United States for decades at this point to live free. That is why the United States cannot deal with Cuba. That is why the United States cannot let it go. Cuba is an example of masses of oppressed people, masses of poor and working class African people organizing and successfully waging a political and military struggle against the most dangerous empire that has ever existed and winning. And winning, y'all. This is why Cuba is so important, because Cuba is a victory for the masses of poor and working class people, and Cuba is a victory for the masses of African people. Cuba is an ongoing example of the possibility of us winning against capitalism and imperialism. Is a powerful symbol of freedom to this day. That is why you hear nothing but lies about Cuba, because they don't want us to learn from Cuba's example. But the Venceremos Brigade understands that those of us fighting against police terrorism in the United States, those of us fighting against capitalist exploitation in the United States, those of us fighting against environmental racism in the United States can learn so much from what Cuba has done and continues to do. It is a powerful, powerful example for movements for liberation all around the world, but particularly for us in the belly of the beast that are still fighting for basic liberation. Cuba is a powerful example, and the Venceremos Brigade understands there's much that those of us fighting for justice in the United States can learn from the Cuban Revolution. That's why the United States does not want us to go there, because as soon as you see what life is like after a revolution happens, you will never accept anything less than revolution. You never will. Once I went to Cuba and understood that revolution was possible and it was way better than anything I'd ever experienced, no one could ever talk me out of revolution ever again. All the time when I talk about revolution in the United States, people are like, it's too dangerous, it's too hard, you can't win. But I saw it, y'all. I saw it. And I will never listen to that shit again. Because not only do those people take on the most dangerous empire that has ever existed, but they won and they keep winning, and their lives are better by every measure, blockade or no blockade, than anything I've ever experienced in the United States. Point blank, period. So the Venceremos Brigade understands that Cuba is an extremely powerful example for liberation. So I talked about the VB. I talked about the impact of the blockade on Cuba. I talked about why solidarity with Cuba is important and why Cuba is an essential example for people fighting for justice in the United States and throughout the world. Yes, someone's asking, do they identify as African? Yes, Ross Dots. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Cuba's culture is so clearly African. Where did we go? We went to a place called Camagüey, and to welcome us, they did this like play, this like musical performance, variety show, right? And it was like African dancers, African music, African cultural performances. When you go to Cuba, everybody you see is African. It is openly African culture. So absolutely, yes, they identify as African. Even Fidel Castro himself said our culture is African and indigenous. Cuba understands themselves as African better than we do in the United States. Better than we do for the most part. So yes, they do identify as African. Anywho, so I talked about why Cuba is important. I talked about solidarity with Cuba. And now actually, this is a very good segue into the conversation about Cuba's history of solidarity with the African liberation struggle. It is a long and extensive. We actually did a show just about this one time, and it was like 90 minutes long. I don't have that kind of time. Monique gets to talk soon. So I'm just going to briefly, recap some of like the most important examples of Cuba showing up in solidarity with the African Revolution. I'm just trying to pull up these slides so I can come with the receipts. So first and foremost, it's important to understand, like I said, that Cuba is a majority African nation. Cuba's population is majority African, and it has been so since the 1700s. Since slavery, y'all. It is 60 to 70% African. When you get off the plane, you see nothing but African people. It is very clear that it's an African motherfucking nation. But another really important thing to understand is that after the Cuban Revolution was won, Cuba did not just isolate itself. Cuba wasn't just like, we're good. Okay, y'all, good luck with all that shit you're trying to do. No, Cuba, despite the fact that it was under attack by the United States, despite the fact that it was extremely poor, despite the fact that it had to figure out how to build a society from the ground up while under constant attack, Cuba still showed up for revolutionary struggles for liberation all over the world in any way that it could. So I want to read this quote from Nelson Mandela talking about how Cuba showed up for Africa during anti-colonial struggles in Africa. So Nelson Mandela says, the Cuban people hold a special place in the hearts of the peoples of Africa. The Cuban internationalists have made a contribution to African independence, freedom, and justice unparalleled for its principled and selfless character. Cubans came to our region as doctors, teachers, soldiers, agricultural experts, but never as colonizers. They have shared the same trenches as us in the struggle against colonialism, underdevelopment, and apartheid. So that's again Nelson Mandela of the African National Congress, a man that certainly has his contradictions, but a man who was on the front line of the struggle against apartheid in Southern Africa, talking about how Cuba showed up, and he said straight up, Cuba came to help. Cuba did not come to take from us anything. Cuba came to give to us. That's all. And so places where Cuba has showed up for Africa and the diaspora, this is not going to be a full list. There are many, many more places, but this is just an incomplete list of places where Cuba showed up for Africa. So Angola, Azania, also known as South Africa, the Congo, Central Africa, Eritrea, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Namibia, Tanzania, Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, Chicago, Harlem, and they tried to show up in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, when thousands of African people in New Orleans were displaced and suffering, and the Bush administration was like, damn, it didn't do anything. Cuba offered to send doctors and water and mobile medical centers to New Orleans to assist in the recovery, and the Bush administration said, no, thank you. They said, no, thank you. And of course, almost 2,000 African people went on to die in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. But Cuba did attempt to help the massive African people here. Just like during the COVID-19 pandemic, Cuba has offered to send doctors and medicine, and the United States government has turned them down. So again, that was an incomplete list of places where Cuba has showed up for Africa and the diaspora, and some specific struggles during Operation Carlotta, which is a 15-year-long Cuban solidarity mission. The MPLA, which was a revolutionary African organization that fought Portuguese colonialism in Angola, called out to the world for help, said we need support in this struggle against colonialism and apartheid in Southern Africa. The rest of the world was like, good luck with that. Cuba showed up. From 1975 to 1991, Cuba sent hundreds of thousands of doctors, soldiers, teachers, guns, and money, y'all, to assist the MPLA in their fight against Portuguese colonialism. They named that mission Operation Carlotta. Carlotta, if you're wondering, was the name of a revolutionary African woman who was enslaved in Cuba during Spanish colonialism, who led a year-long enslaved African uprising against the system of chattel slavery in Cuba. And then hundreds of years later, not only does Cuba remember who that woman was, but they named their solidarity mission in Angola after her. They said, we are returning to Africa to fight colonialism, and we're going to invoke the memory of this revolutionary African woman to do it. So Operation Carlotta was decisive in ending the spread of apartheid throughout Southern Africa. You may or may not know this, but the apartheid settler government in South Africa wanted to take over the entirety of the southern tip of the continent, y'all. They wanted to spread apartheid beyond Azania to the entirety of Southern Africa. The only thing that stopped that was the armed revolutionary resistance of African organizations like the MPLA and the assistance of Cuba. The Battle of Cuito Cuanavale was the decisive battle that forced the apartheid army back to South Africa, forced them to the table to negotiate. That is directly how Namibia gained its independence, and that is also what stopped the spread of apartheid in Southern Africa. We could not have done that without Cuba, and Cuba did that under the revolutionary African leadership of the MPLA. So that's just one example. Another example, of course, is how Cuba showed up for the revolution in Guinea-Bissau, led by the PAIGC. The Operation Carlotta was 15 years. The Solidarity Mission in Guinea-Bissau was 10 years long. Cuba shows up for the long haul, y'all. They send hundreds of thousands of people. They send money. They send guns. Oh my God. There was like horrible cursed Twitter discourse talking about Fidel Castro helped Cuba for clout. Man, if you say something like that, like, fuck you, dog. Like, fuck you. Like, I'm saying that directly to you. Like, if you believe that Fidel Castro helped Cuba for clout, if you believe that hundreds of thousands of mostly African Cuba took a one-way trip to Africa to fight colonialism for clout, you can go to hell. You can go to hell. You're a cynical and useless person. They did that because they understood they are an African nation. They did that because they understood that the liberation of Africa is kind of the liberation of all of humanity and all life on earth. What the fuck do you mean by clout? Who makes a one-way trip to die on another continent in order to fight for liberation for clout? What kind of fucking, like, what are you talking about? Like, that discourse can be mad as fuck. But anyway, Cuba provided medicine, food, and war materials to the PIGC for 10 years from 1964 until 1974, when the PIGC won Guinea-Bissau's independence from Portugal. The Cuba sent doctors, nurses, soldiers, and fought side by side with the PIGC. But for the PIGC, it was essential that Africans be the primary agents of the national liberation struggle, and thus, while Cuban fighters were accepted in the liberation war, they were only placed in units where the PIGC lacked skills and manpower, so like artillery units. And the reason why the PIGC did that is because Amilcar Cabral and the masses of Africans in the PIGC understood that they wanted Cuba's assistance, but the revolutionary struggle in Guinea-Bissau could only be won by the Africans that lived in Guinea-Bissau. Support, solidarity is fine, but we must take the leadership in our struggles for liberation. And Cuba not only understood that, Cuba followed our lead all across Africa, all across the diaspora. Cuba followed our lead and showed up precisely how we asked them to. These crackers that you call our allies are constantly in our faces trying to tell us what to do, trying to tell us how to fight, trying to tell us how to move, and you tell us that we have to deal with them. Meanwhile, people are accusing Cuba of helping us for clout, and Cuba followed our leadership. They followed our leadership. They asked us exactly how to show up, and then they did that shit in nation after nation after nation, and struggle after struggle after struggle. My God, that some of the discourse that happens on the internet is so stupid. Is like so stupid and so destructive. People just be saying it. They just be saying it, and it just makes me so angry. Can you tell? Anyway, so that was like a very brief. Discussion of Cuba and African solidarity. Comrades are asking, what are some books to read about this? And I actually have some on my shelf. 1 second. I have many more. I didn't want to be off camera for too long. So this book, I highly recommend. Unfortunately, it's showing it backwards. But it's called Conflicting Missions, Havana, Washington, and Africa from 1975 to 1976. And so it's comparing and contrasting the way that United Snakes showed up in Africa during anti-colonial struggles and the way that Cuba showed up in Africa during anti-colonial struggles. So it's kind of like a comparative analysis, and it is very good, quite a thick book, very detailed, lots of resources and footnotes to follow on. And then another book I highly recommend is this book, The African Dream, by Che Guevara, and his account of the Cuba's attempt to show up in solidarity with the revolutionary anti-colonial struggle in the Congo. That unfortunately did not go well. Patrice Lumumba was assassinated, and that shit went to hell very quickly. So that mission was not successful, but Che Guevara has very important insights in this book about why it didn't work, as well as describing how Cuba pivoted in order to build relationships with other anti-colonial movements in Africa and show better next time. So those are two books that you should check out. Conflicting Missions, Havana, Washington, and Africa, and then The African Dream by Che Guevara. And I have some other books, but like I said, I didn't want to be off screen for like a long ass time. Anywho, so I already talked about why the U.S. hates Cuba so badly. It's because it's a majority African nation that successfully waged a revolutionary struggle against U.S. imperialism. They won. They cut off U.S. access to their resources, land, and labor, and the U.S. cannot take it. Not only can they no longer treat Cuba like a plantation, but the people that cut off their access were Africans? Oh no! Like, oh no! No wonder the U.S. can't take that shit. Like Cuba shows that white supremacy is a bunch of bullshit, is what they do. Anyway, so like I said, the Venceremos Brigade is a solidarity delegation to Cuba, one of the oldest that exists in the world. It is open to everybody who wants to learn the truth about the Cuban Revolution. If you want to know more about the Venceremos Brigade, I encourage you to check out the website, bbforcuba.com. Also, the Venceremos Brigade is intentionally working to be as diverse as possible. The delegation that I went on had a number of African people, indigenous comrades, queer comrades, disabled comrades, elders. It was intentionally extremely diverse across all intersections, and we want to continue to build more and more and more diverse brigades, which means that if we want African youth, Chicano youth, indigenous youth, disabled comrades, and poor working class people to be able to afford an international trip, that means that we are going to have to donate to make that possible. And so if you are interested in donating to support the Venceremos Brigade so they can provide grants to poor and working class colonized folks, then please check out that link I just dropped in the chat where you can donate online to support the Venceremos Brigade. So that was the PE section. Thank you so much. And if Monica is ready, I will pass it to the comrade. I think I'm pinned. I'm pinned myself. There you are. Okay, cool.
Comrade, learned so much. I have so many questions. That was lots more why the narrative for the solidarity. So today, everyone, greetings, glad to be. I'm going to be talking about a few Mexico updates. So Mexico update down back up all the plan and it had voted on a lot of movements on not going back to school until it was green. And then the Biden administration said, no, we need to open up the economy, keep the economy going, so much. And we will sacrifice lives, so open up schools. And PED here locally opened up schools, and everything that people predicted would happen. So in March, the week of March 22nd, by the way, 16 schools this is when students were not in school, had 2 or more positive cases. So this doesn't even say the ones that have had one positive case. So in facilities where it was just adults, no students in the building, 16 facilities had positive cases. In those, there were about 5 or 6 in Albuquerque. So like El Dorado High School, Cibola, Petroglyph Elementary School. So there was other schools who had those cases, again, with students not in the building. Then week of April 6th, the majority of schools opened up. Not all, but the majority of schools in New Mexico opened up. And what have we been seeing? Positive cases in so many of our schools locally, as well as around New Mexico. So many of you probably saw El Dorado closed. They had 4 positive cases and they are closed for 2 weeks and they're opening up April 26th. Las Cruces Elementary School, they had 223 students exposed to a positive case. So they also quarantined those students and they are expected to open up in 2 weeks. As many of you, all of us are trying to figure out what is the school's policies on how schools close and how schools don't close, because they're receiving emails like, hey, your kid was exposed to a positive case. We're just letting you know. And you're like, wait, what does that mean? Or there was a school in the classroom and somebody had a positive case, but they're not closing. So I went ahead and pulled what New Mexico PED's policy is for closures. So it says, if there is a rapid one or more case reported in a single day of a person being infected while on campus, along with any positive cases, with testing day up to 1 day after the reported cases. I don't know what that means, but that's what the policy says. So what I'm thinking it's saying is within 1 day, if there is a positive case, and if that when that happens, that's when it closed, when it's 4 or more times. And so the schools that are closing now, they're actually closing because of the safety precautions that they are doing, but they're not following these guidelines. So make sure you contact your school to ask more questions. So according to this policy, El Dorado just made the choice to close. Las Cruces made the choice to close, even though it wasn't the rapid case that happened in 1 day. Also, 3 high schools in New Mexico, they are actually moving to remote. So in Bloomfield's one of them, and Socorro's one of them. They had 7 positive cases within 4 days, but it's not that like double case a day. So they've decided to move remotely. So it seems like there is a little bit of autonomy. If schools feel like it's a safe thing to close, some schools are actually pushing against the grain and saying, we're going to close for the safety of students. The other thing wanting to report is just shout out to our teachers and family and all this adjustment that's happening. And our teachers are, pushing through, but they're having a difficult time teaching online at the same time and teaching in person. Who would have thought there would be tons of challenges, right? So you're teaching like this, you're teaching to your classroom, you're teaching like this. There's some teachers who don't even have projectors or screens in their room. So they're teaching off their laptops. And so many challenges are happening. Just shout out to teachers, students, and families that are doing your best and showing up at your best. And hopefully we have more practices that really support folks and meet them where they are. The next thing we want to talk about is some world geo news. So talking about vaccines. So with vaccines, in this country, about 23% of people have been vaccinated. That means they're fully dosed with the 2 vaccines. And there's been some challenges with the vaccinations. So the AstraZeneca that's being given like in Africa and Britain, they are seeing that it is causing blood clots in the brain. So 79 people have had side effects. And out of those 79 people, 19 have actually died because of the blood clots in the brain. And the majority of those people are below 30 who are receiving that vaccine. And the one that people are also talking about here is the Johnson & Johnson. So the Johnson, and AstraZeneca is not here, but Johnson & Johnson is in this country. And so with Johnson & Johnson, they're also seeing blood clots. So there's been 6 cases, all women between the ages of 18 and 48. They had symptoms within 13 days. And unfortunately, 1 woman in Virginia died and another woman in Nebraska is in the hospital under critical condition. So the CDC has paused giving out the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And New Mexico yesterday sent a update that they are also pausing all Johnson & Johnson vaccinations. So that is not being given out and it is being researched on. The other thing we want to talk to you about is in world updates is the lynching of Dante Wright. So Dante resided in Brooklyn Center and was lynched by police. This is 10 miles happening away from right now where there's the court case for the murder of George Floyd happening. And he was pulled over, racially profiled, as a Black young man driving for some air fresheners. It had nothing to do with air fresheners. He was racially profiled and he was lynched. He was murdered. 20 years old with a 2-year-old. So that child will grow up without a father because this system is doing what it was created to do, is lynch our people. Not only is the family grieving, the community is grieving. Dante is not an isolated case. I'm sorry, this is it's hard for me to talk about, and I've been struggling with this because this continuous trauma, this continuous impact of them killing our people is heavy because this happens all the time. And the people, the community are rising. You know, they're calling for a demand of justice. And there's also claims that, you know, she said she pulled the taser versus the gun when they're on opposite sides and they weigh different. And it's clearly labeled because there's a yellow mark on the taser. And like, don't buy into that false narrative. She lynched him. She murdered him. That's somebody's child. That's someone's baby. That's someone's father. That's our people, period. And with the uprisings, what's happening in Minneapolis, what we see is militarization of police coming out. They're out in riot gear. They're out in, the National Guard is there. They're shooting rounds, impact rounds into people. They're throwing tear gas. So much is happening. Arrests are happening. I know on Monday, 40 people were arrested. On another day, 60 people were arrested. And they're being arrested because they're fighting for justice. That's why they're being arrested. They're criminalizing people who want the system to stop murdering us. I don't even know what to say. All I know is Dante's not going to be the last, y'all. That same damn department, two years in 2015, 2019, they used the same excuse of an officer used a taser instead of a gun. Like, for me, I can only speak for me personally right now, is not only fuck police, abolish the hell out of them. That's just how I feel. Like, I'm done. I'm beyond tired. And that could be me. That could be you. That could be my son. That could be any one of us. Because there is no bubble. There is no safety net. The only people who got us is us, y'all. We're the only ones who are going to be able to protect ourselves. We're the only ones that's going to be able to get that oppression off our necks. And we have to not only build critical consciousness to talk about these issues, is we have to organize, because this system is toxic, it's poisoning. And this same system that's killing us here, they're killing our people globally. For generations, for trillions of people have died. Name a place. We learned about Iran yesterday, and Iran, and Iraq, and Afghanistan, and Haiti, and Africa, and Cuba. Like all of this oppression stems from this system, and we have to dismantle it. I can't even imagine what his family, he called his mama, y'all. He called her when he got pulled over. He called her. And she's like, hand him the phone. I'm gonna pass it to you, Anya Sabu, because I don't know what else to say about the situation. I'm just My body's shaking. It's just too much. Too much murder of our people. And again, it's like, it's the history of our struggle. Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, Michael Brown, there's countless names, y'all. This isn't an isolated incident. This is the struggle we've been doing for generations since our people were kidnapped from Africa. It's not gonna stop. It's up to us as a community, as a whole, to see ourselves connected, to organize, to stop it. You see, they just pick us off. And we can't do that no more. I'm gonna pass it to my comrade, Onya Sabu.
So much, Monica. That was beautiful and powerful, and you're absolutely right. It's just not going to stop. This is what, like, as long as police have existed in the United States, they have been killing African people. They've been brutalizing African people. That's why they exist, to brutalize African people and to brutalize indigenous people and to make sure that the structure of power in which European settlers are on top and everybody else is on the bottom is maintained. You make sure the structure of power in which a few people hold most of the wealth and everybody else is suffering maintained. Like, that's why police exist, and they're not going to stop until we stop them. Comrade says in the comments, Audra says, it's time to abolish them completely and close the prisons too. Prisons are only there for labor anyway. 100% correct. People are straight up enslaved within US prisons, manufacturing goods for Victoria's Secrets, McDonald's, Whole Foods, straight up enslaved. And it's actually the same people. It's African people, indigenous people, Chicano people, working for these corporations while incarcerated. Also saying I can't watch the video. I think referring to the assassination of Don Trey Wright. And I don't recommend you do. I don't think there's any reason, like, at this point we know. It's been hundreds of years, y'all. I don't understand why these videos go viral. I don't understand why they autoplay on African people's feeds. I don't understand why Europeans are so comfortable consuming. Actually, I do understand why Europeans are very comfortable consuming videos of us being murdered, because that's their culture. But we already know what's in that. We don't need to watch it. You don't need to feel like you have to subject yourself. But that was the World Geo update. We just have a few more portions of the program before we wrap it up for this week. So next, I just want to briefly promote some great revolutionary African projects that members of our community are working on. First up, we have the book recently published by APIP California cadre Ajamu Umi, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. The book is available for purchase on Amazon.com. It is $8, a self-published book. It is very much worth a read because, just like Monica said, these police are not going to stop killing us. These police are not going to stop terrorizing our communities. There's no reform, there's no policy change that is going to change the fundamental of the nature of the relationship between African people and the police in the United States. There's no reform within this system that is going to change that relationship. The only thing that's going to change that relationship is African communities organizing for community defense. That is it, and that is all. We need to create communities that are strong enough to defend and protect themselves. We need to create communities that do not need police. And the way we do that is by building revolutionary institutions of community defense. And Ajamu's book is a straight up step-by-step guide to how to do that. Like I said, it's $8, and he literally breaks down step by step how to build an organization, how to build a community defense program, how to recruit people from the community to keep that program going, how to make sure it lasts for years and years. He literally gives you step-by-step instructions for how to do that. So whenever we're like, join an organization you might say doesn't exist, build one, there's always at least one person like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know, like, man, I don't. All you need is like 2 friends in a book and you got an organization. But if you are someone who needs like step-by-step instructions, the guide exists and it's less than $10. So please check out Ajamu Umi's book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. He is not trying to make money. No one sells a book for $8 if they self-publish because they're trying to make money. He is trying to build a revolutionary movement for community defense in African neighborhoods across this nation, y'all. And y'all can contribute to that work by buying that book and, most importantly, reading it together and then using it to build in your neighborhood. on your block. We have to build communities that are strong enough to defend themselves, that do not need police. The police will never be reformed. The police only exist to maintain the violent structure of power and oppression that the United States is built on. That is always what they've been here to do. That's the only thing they will ever do. So let's build communities that don't need them, that we'll never call them. Also, today is Thursday, which means there are new posts on the Hood Communist blog. Hood Communist is a revolutionary African nationalist publication run by a coalition of revolutionary African organizations. The All African People's Revolutionary Party, the Ujima People's Progress Party, Black Alliance for Peace, and Black Hammer all collaborate to present to you Hood Communist. Every single Thursday, we publish new articles on the blog. This Thursday is no exception. We got a piece tearing down Joe Biden and exposing him for the white supremacist cracker that he is. We have a piece from the Ujima People Progress Party talking about why we have to throw away the Black leadership class. People like Marilyn Mosby, people like Barack Obama, they are not for us. We have to understand that as poor working class African people. We have another piece from a comrade talking about why African people have to be on the front lines of the fight to destroy capitalism and build socialism before climate change comes and wrecks all of us, y'all. We are going to be the first to fall if the climate apocalypse comes. And the only way to stop that from happening is to destroy capitalism and build socialism. It's the only motherfucking way. And that's what this piece is talking about. We also got another piece talking about the U.S. and Kenya free trade agreement and why that agreement is a very bad deal for Kenya, why Kenya needs to say no to that free trade agreement. And lastly, we have a poem discussing armed resistance against the police. It's a poem called A Poem in Which We Shoot Back. And if you are someone who is feeling a lot of pain about how African people are continuously cut down by these racist ass police, then I highly recommend that you check out that poem. A Poem in Which We Shoot Back. So please check out all the latest pieces on Hood Communist blog. Please continue to read and share those pieces. Very important to share. We were recently permanently banned from Twitter. They permanently banned us from Twitter. They got us up out of there. We appealed the suspension. They said, we will never bring your account back. I find it funny because there's like people on there, like people would come in our comments, call us nignogs, call us the N-word, send us like pictures of lynchings, like all kinds of stuff on a consistent basis. Also happens to APRP New Mexico, report that tweet, nothing happens. They didn't even tell us why Hood Communist was suspended. They just banned us forever. So we can't go back. But you can still tweet our articles, you can still share them on social media, and you can still make sure that revolutionary African voices that are unapologetically socialist and anti-imperialist are heard widely, y'all. So please read and share the articles. And then lastly, African Liberation Day is almost here. African Liberation Day is celebrated all across the African world on May 25th throughout Africa, throughout the diaspora. The All African People's Revolutionary Party is organizing an online free web broadcast of African Liberation Day, just like we did last year. We are doing it again this year on Tuesday, May 25th. I believe it starts at 11 a.m. and goes until 1 p.m. Mountain Time, but I will confirm that, and we will certainly share that information on the APRP website and Facebook page. But please, I encourage y'all to spread the word about ALD and join us for that broadcast. And we encourage you to share that news far and wide. ALD is a celebration of the movement for African liberation. ALD is a celebration of the movement to build revolutionary Pan-Africanism. ALD, African Liberation Day, is the day where African people's revolutionary organizations from all over the world come together to build and to celebrate. And so you do not want to miss that web broadcast on Tuesday, May 25th. And I just put the African Liberation Day .net website in the chat, and I encourage y'all to check that out. That's it for the promos. That's it. So lastly, or next thing I want to do is just give y'all a brief update on the work that our chapter is doing here on Tiwa territory. As we mentioned before, we are starting a Pan-African community garden in the South Broadway neighborhood of Albuquerque, Tiwa territory. We're going to be building that on the corner of Avenida Cesar Chavez and Arno. Monica told me this morning, Avenida Cesar Chavez used to be Bridge Avenue. So if you're like an old time Albuquerque person, it's like Bridge and Arno. But for me, who just moved here, it's Avenida Cesar Chavez and Arno. It's the lot behind that strip mall that has the market. The lot right behind the market. We are going to be building a garden from the ground up with the African community of Albuquerque. We want to feed the people. We want to show the people how to grow their own food. We want a gathering space to build the revolutionary Pan-African movement in Albuquerque. I want to have like political education, protests, like all kinds of like cookouts. Like, man, I have plans, and I'm sure everybody else does too. But we're having our very first community event at that space this Sunday, April 18th from 2 to 5 p.m. So if you're in Albuquerque, come through. If you're in New Mexico, come through. We're going to be cleaning up the lot. Like, it's literally just like a lot that was abandoned for like a long ass time. There's like trash, there's needles, there's rocks. We're going to clean all that up, and we'll provide the tools to do that and get it ready for building some raised beds and building some shade structures and gathering space on the lot. So please come through Sunday, April 18th from 2 to 5 p.m. to assist with that cleanup day. You'll get to meet us. You'll get to meet our comrades with Millions for Prisoners who are collaborating with us on this project. You get to hear more about our vision for the space and also share your ideas for what the space should be as well. Also, we have been feeding elders every single Saturday afternoon for over a year. Our elder care program is still going. Every single Saturday, we deliver care packages with food, cleaning supplies, math, and political education to African elders in our community. We have been doing that since March of last year, and we will continue to do so while it's still unsafe for elders to be in the street with this pandemic, y'all. Period. So if you know of an elder that is needing of that kind of support, hit us up at aprpnewmexico@gmail.com, and we will get them on our list of deliveries. Anything else that you would add, Monica, before we go to the closing?
No, I think you summed it up. I'm excited for Sunday.
Me too. Like, I have been tired of quarantine. I'm ready to be outside. I miss 4th of July. I miss May Day. I miss the events we used to. Like, I'm tired of this. I'm tired. Let's be with the people again. Anywho, so let's wrap it up. As mentioned, Weekly Pan-African News is presented to y'all every single Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. We will be back next week, and the show topic is going to be COVID, the environment, and land back. COVID, the environment, and land back is what we're going to be discussing this week, meaning that COVID is a result of environmental destruction. They told you it was China. It was actually fucking capitalism. We're going to be talking about that. And we're going to be talking about how land back, returning stolen land to indigenous peoples in Africa, in Turtle Island, and in Palestine is the #1 most effective way to fight climate change. #1 most effective way. We're going to be talking about that. And I was hoping that we can have some guests, which I will hit up soon. Also, we want to remind you that we are the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We are a revolutionary Pan-African Socialist Party based in Africa with chapters throughout the African world, and we are constantly recruiting. We are trying to build a mass African people's movement to win revolutionary Pan-Africanism, win one unified socialist Africa. So if you are an African person watching this program and you are not in an organization fighting for justice, we encourage you to join the APRP. We welcome you. Hit us up, aprpnewmexico@gmail.com, or message us on Facebook or Instagram, and we will get you leaked in. Even if you're not in New Mexico, hit us up, and we will help you find the circle that's closest to you. If you're not African and you're watching the program, we encourage you to join an organization fighting for justice. There are so many organizations that are open to non-African people, like the Red Nation, like Black Rose, like IWW, like the Hookup that just launched here in New Mexico, doing mutual aid. There are so many organizations fighting for justice, fighting for a better world. They all need help. One constant of social justice organizing is like a few people doing a lot of work, being very tired. Monica relates. Very tired. So we need you to join organizations. Please help us. Share the load. Join an organization fighting for justice. If the organization you want to see does not exist, build that organization. If you don't know how to build an organization, read Ajamu's book. He explains it in detail. He gives you step 1, step 2. Like, my God, like, it's written down for you, plain English. So thank you so much for joining us. Join us again next week at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. I'm going to play after the close, just like a little slideshow of flyers with some music for upcoming events. And so we thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Hey.
Thank you so much.
Atom. Reloaded. Atom. Reloaded. Junior. Ha. Yawa Krum. Yawa Krum. Rasta Fuwa Krum. Rasta Fuwa Krum. Yawa Krum. Harok Fuwa Krum. Harok Fuwa Krum. Yawa Krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls. Fresh boys, fresh girls. Yawa Krum. Boya Mami. I'm Shafe. I'm Kwajalami. Yawa Krum. Rasta Fuwa Krum. Rasta Fuwa Krum. Yawa Krum. boys, fresh girls. Fresh watch, fresh girls. Where am I? I'm Trafe, I'm Kwajalami. Me wo krum. I shall what so the young shimbo. Me Jimmy, Magunko, the lions den. Chata boom, don't try me. Me dribble, her off where you feel in some man pom. Yes, yeah. You give a bomb money in the back to cash it. I got them before, no be property. Depend near your intimate sympathy. Manum Pisha, Pasho, Nanatachi, Alomo, Casapaco, and the dry daddy. Yawo Chrome, Bisakubabu, and Netaju. You do, Untimate Yamugu. This is Capudo, send up to Su. The blessing now. I let you. Rasta fuwa krum, Rasta fuwa krum. Harok fuwa krum, Harok fuwa krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls. Where am I? I'm Trafe, I'm Kwajalami. Rasta fuwa krum, Rasta fuwa krum. Harok fuwa krum, Harok fuwa krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls. Where am I? I'm Trafe, I'm Kwajalami.
Them times if I'm in the manty, Friday night, a boy and natch it. Natch it, forget it, was it. And if I not saw just mama son tonight, you room. I was so come magazine. Yeah, born to a yo salamujin. And now join your table, bitch, feeling free. Last time pensa, one roll nicodine. And you dope. When you see car, you the joke. Guess if I broke, cause coffee, you broke. Work hard on the low. Anything for the dough, like check it dough. Come at us, what in your wording. My money too strong to me, here, wording. Remember them who get that's what I'm saying. You can ask about me way back, I don't think you will come.
Rasta fuwa krum, Rasta fuwa krum. Harok fuwa krum, Harok fuwa krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls. Where am I? I'm Trafe, I'm Kwajalami. Rasta fuwa krum, Rasta fuwa krum. Harok fuwa krum, Harok fuwa krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls. Where am I? I'm Trafe, I'm Kwajalami. Roman yende. Ya bro keke, sorry the yasa, so do fun sa man pusa say. Today be today, obi ajini pay. Sister Aisha, yan shisha, no cocaine. Oh, new generation, money belongs to the youth. Some build mansions, others they drink pepper soup. What be the action? You for look sharp, don't be thief. Millions and thousands, let's be one and just forget the beef. Rasta fuwa krum, Rasta fuwa krum. Harok fuwa krum, Harok fuwa krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls. Where am I? I'm Trafe, I'm Kwajalami. Rasta fuwa krum, Rasta fuwa krum. Harok fuwa krum, Harok fuwa krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls. Where am I? I'm Trafe, I'm Kwajalami. What's up, shaker? Man